Karen Cook is one of the founding partners of PLP Architecture. She led the design team for 22 Bishopsgate and is design partner for 4 Cannon Street, also in the City of London. That's a red sandstone structure on an extremely sensitive site opposite St Paul's Cathedral and adjacent to the historic St Nicholas Cole Abbey. These are 2 projects which have very different sensitivities. So I asked Karen how she approached the design of 2 such very different buildings.
At Cannon Street, we designed what became Fidelity's London headquarters. St Paul's Cathedral restricts, with its strategic heights, views of the dome and peristyle. It was very important at Cannon Street to the city planners to maintain a visual connection between St Paul's Cathedral and Wren's initial church, St Nicholas Cole Abbey. A formal facade frame, respectful in a modern vernacular, faces the cathedral and the festival gardens. A more informal approach to the west facade steps down toward Distaff Lane, revealing the Abbey. In response to Bracken House, a Grade 2 star-listed building, we set back the top floor. We selected a pinkish-red Lazenby sandstone so that the group of working buildings would set the religious structures in Portland stone apart as monuments. We did create public spaces of 2 different characters, one on Cannon Street, which forms a forecourt as part of the pedestrian route across the site, and one which is more of a secret green garden on the lower level for office workers in the area to hide away from the tourists. 22 Bishopsgate is a tower designed at the scale of the wider city. The city wanted an all-glass building, simpler in contrast to the earlier standalone icons. We worked with Gartner to design a closed cavity facade with movable blinds in the cavity that allow us to restrict solar gain while allowing in 60% more daylight than a comparably performing double-glazed facade. Its 23 facets in low iron glass reflect the ever-changing light in the sky, alternately transparent, reflective, or milky white. At times, the tower appears to be defined by bold planes of light. 22 is designed for the individual and for multiple tenants. Rather than design for a single company headquarters, the developer wanted to create a community, a vertical village of amenities where people can meet, learn, relax, be stimulated. The amenities help to support the individual, giving convenience and choice. Active travel is encouraged by a 1700 cycle park with showers and lockers, but also cycle repair, cycle washing, safety classes, clothes dry cleaning, in all a facility to encourage cycling and fitness. At 22, there is already a difference at the threshold. With multiple entrances, a feeling of fluidity and openness is created. Facial recognition is opt-in for tenants, and visitors are sent QR codes, so entry to the building can be seamless, as if you're boarding a train. As on the skyline, equally, 22 Bishopsgate contributes to the pedestrian experience. To create a base that would respond to the scale of Gibson Hall and the predominantly historic buildings opposite, we introduced a very bold canopy in ultra-high strength fiber-reinforced concrete that is bold enough to compete with the tower above and joins together the base, really giving the base permission to have its own character. A large glass canopy marks the entrance to the building for people arriving from Liverpool Street or from points east and west, namely Bank Junction or St Mary Axe. A newly publicly accessible route crosses the site, linking Bank Junction and Bishopsgate to Crosby Square, Undershaft, and St Mary Axe beyond. And this is lined with glass artwork. And I should mention that the glass artwork is all designed by Alexander Belashenko. And he's drawing on the tradition of the guilds, the mantle and the crest and the colors of the guild to bring into his artwork. The base also has an independent entrance for the public to the top of the building, where there are restaurants and London's highest free-to-access public viewing gallery. There's curated changing art, currently by Karine Laval, a French photographer, whose work is entitled Heterotopia, and by Ryan Mosley, a Sheffield-based figure painter. The craft that you see in the entrance is designed by Pierre Renard, who's a furniture sculptor who hand makes his work, and the leather work is by Bill Amberg.
At a time when retrofit, where feasible, is seen as the preferred solution to development, Can you imagine how a building like 22 will evolve over the next 50 to 100 years?
I think first we should speak about resilience. 22 Bishopsgate is built to last a long time, and that's the most sustainable thing one can do. Buildings that survive over time are essentially frameworks, to be adapted in whatever way the users require. I like to look at the example of the Seagram building in New York, built over 60 years ago. It has adaptable office space with good daylight, a generous public space, and outward-facing ground floor uses. 22 Bishopsgate is right in the heart of the city, on a Roman road where there has been trade for over 2,000 years, and I expect it will continue. 22 Bishopsgate has a robust and resilient design with plenty of vertical circulation and generous ceiling heights. The closed cavity facade is highly efficient and gives great daylight. It also gives the individual control over how much daylight he wants. It can be used to reduce heat loss at nighttime. It has a new pedestrian route across the site to a new public square. But if the users ever require adaptation, the frame of the building is highly adaptable and can be taken apart or handle alterations.
You've done a lot of work in Paris. How do you see the difference of the attitude to tall buildings in the two cities?
London's low-lying conservation areas, juxtaposed with its newer, taller buildings, create a visually dynamic environment. Paris has a history of much more prescribed planning regulations. When Napoleon decided to modernize the city, clear the slums, and control uprisings, housemen cut swathes, sometimes violently, through the built environment. Wren tried to introduce a master plan post-fire, but it was rejected. Recently, the City of London has introduced new planning requirements and conditions to make the city greener and more inclusive. It's introduced consolidated delivery, first here at 22 Bishopsgate, which makes the streets cleaner and safer and reduces traffic. It's introduced higher cycle parking requirements, supported by facilities. It's introduced the urban greening factor to bring greenery into the streets, which are full of services underneath and very difficult to add trees. It's introduced a requirement for more permeability across smaller sites. It's introduced new requirements for community uses at grade, especially cultural uses. And the city has started closing streets, either temporarily through technological aid or permanently, as they're now proposing at Bank Junction to change, which I think is a great idea. In Paris, they have a very strong objective to create what they call the 15-minute city, where it's possible to walk to work, walk to school, walk to the shop, walk to your doctor, walk to meet friends. That's possible because of their high density. Paris has a population density of well over 20,000 people per square kilometer, and in areas like Bastille, it's over 40,000. London, by contrast, ranges from 4,500 to maybe 11,000 in the densest inner boroughs. So to achieve that level of walkability, we really have to look at how to make London a denser city. And we've talked about the low-lying conservation areas. Paris is roughly 28 meters in height. London's conservation areas are maybe 2 stories, average. So it's a mathematical impossibility to replicate Paris without demolishing large swathes of London. And so that's why I'm an advocate of tall buildings. Of course, here in the city, we're right on top of the nation's best public transport. But also in the suburbs, or in conservation areas, where you could find selectively locations to add and insert surgically some taller buildings. But in these locations, by tall, I mean 12, 15, maybe 18 stories at a push. In the city, it makes sense to continue with commercial buildings. In the suburbs, where we need residential buildings, land values are also still very high. Young people have a difficult time buying property, even renting property.
And how do you respond to those who say that 22 Bishopsgate is too tall?
Without wanting to be too provocative, my response is that I think the other towers are too small. There's a quote in a book, Quand la Cathedral était blanche. Le Corbusier visited New York, and he commented that the towers were too small. And by that he meant there needed to be more open space, and in order to achieve the necessary workspace or a residential space, the buildings he felt could have been taller. People want to be in cities, seeking opportunity and fun, and the climate crisis is only increasing that trend. In an era where housing is in short supply and there is low availability of land, it makes sense for office buildings to be tall. It also makes sense to introduce office buildings where there are transport and amenities. The City of London is a unique place in Europe. 1 square mile, its boundaries do not grow. It has extraordinary public transport. It has a civic concept, a highly skilled workforce, a language and a regulatory framework favorable to global business. In that restricted territory, probably a third is covered by conservation area, and still more by the view corridors. So there is only a small area where it is possible to build tall buildings. 22 Bishopsgate is in a zone that the city planners designated to build tall buildings. To produce the kind of buildings that the tenant wants, it's necessary to build large floor plates all the way to the top. 22 Bishopsgate has 40% more area than the former Pinnacle design, but 15% less steel and costs only 10% more. Formally, 22 Bishopsgate joins together other standalone towers into a cluster. Tower 42, the Gherkin, the Cheese Grater. The city planners designated this site as the center of that cluster when seen from the river, in the context of the National Monument of St. Paul's and the International Monument of the Tower. The idea is that the emerging towers will form a cluster and gather around a peak, forming a group so that no single tower competes with the standalone monuments. The critical mass of a large tower makes it possible to offer amenities and foster a community where people can meet, learn, relax, and be stimulated. The city must remain competitive. A lot of the insurance brokers have moved their back office space outside the city, and inside the city they want the very best space. 22 Bishopsgate helps the city keep its identity as the leading global financial center with a world-class business ecosystem. 22, and the still growing cluster of tall building, helps to rebrand its identity as a greener, vibrant place to work with active travel and a more inclusive environment.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you very much for talking about two buildings which reflect the very rich mix of architecture that can be found in the City of London.